Today I'm going to go over how to build cars for PP racing. I wanted to go a little bit more in depth than I did last time. I'm going to do my best not to go into rabbit trails because there's multiple things I can go into, and I want to potentially try and break them up into different videos. Um, but I tried picking out some cars that I have in my garage right now because I don't have any money to kind of go over a few things. And so I wanted to start with this Evo. I haven't really, I haven't built one of these yet, and so it'll be a good experience for me and you guys. Since I also do not have, I got 217,000 credits, and this car is a 506 PP car. Um, I'm gonna build it for like 550 PP, so hopefully I have enough money to be able to do that. But I want to go over what you do to the cars and how they affect the PP, and then also the performance of the cars as well. One of the main things that I look at whenever I'm building a car for PP is my rotational G's down here. Um, those have been one of the most important things that I look at to gauge the pace of the car, like whether or not it's going to be a handling car, if it's going to be a power car, or something in between, and each PP has a different set of G's that work. Like for 600 PP, which is I mostly do 500 or 550 PP and 600 PP. And so for 600 pp, most of the time my G's are roughly around 19, like 119, 120 for my ro, low rotational G's, and then my mid-speed G's can be anywhere from 122 to 125. It just varies on the car. And then because of how I build the cars, my high speed G's are also going to be similar to my low speed G's, if with a little bit of give and take. Like they may be a little bit higher, they may be a little bit lower. The lower they are relative to the low speed and the high speed G's, the faster the car is going to be as far as acceleration and how it pulls and how fast it goes down the straights, because it's going to have the lower drag at that higher speed. So you're going to be able to go faster down these tracks with low speeds, or faster down the tracks with high speed straights, and still be able to have good speed in the corners because of the G's. So you got tracks like Fuji or Trial Mountain. I mean, those still have technical sections where your car needs those low and mid speed G's, and then you also have the straight. And so you'll be fast down the straight because you don't have a lot of drag at those high speeds. And then with these 550, 600 pp cars, I mean, you're not going to be making corners at 150 miles per hour in these cars. So it's not going to matter to have those high G's at this low of PP for racing. Um, so first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to set up and get the necessities that I want out of the tuning shop. And this is something I do for all of my cars, for my PP cars, for my like 500, 550, 600, 700, like it doesn't matter. Um, for for up to 600, I do sport softs on all my cars for the most part. Depending, most of them will be. If you want to do like a straight like speed build and get all the power and not turn at all, I'd probably use sport hards, but the only thing that's really going to be beneficial for is going to be like special stage X, or special route X, or whatever it's called. Um, but for all the other regular tracks, you're going to use sport softs, and that's going to be your best option. And then I go in here and I get my power restrictor. I'll get that. Then I'll get my ballast. And then I go into here and we'll get the LSD. And so you'll notice right here, this part is important for the handling of the vehicle, but for some reason it drops our PP. And so over this is what we're going to be doing to try and get the best out of this vehicle for 550 racing. So we'll install the diff, and then we're going to go over here to this manual transmission, and for this car it does increase the PP slightly, but you look at, let's see, that's about 0.4 and change of PP of what this part costs for the car. And so it's the the amount of like what you get out of actually using this transmission versus the amount that it costs in PP is very high. So you want to be looking for those parts to where you get a lot of benefits for the car, but it costs little PP. And so that's going to be the main thing that we're looking at whenever we're choosing which parts to use and which parts not to use. And then get the anti-lag system, which right now it doesn't cost anything. And then we're going to go in here and get our brake balance controller. And this will allow us to change our brake bias and to help rotation into corners. And it'll help us hopefully swing the rear end out more to get more rotation to follow the front coming into a corner. So that's all I need from there right now. And then we're going to go over, or let's go to the garage real quick before we go over to GT Auto. Now we're going to go back into our car settings, and we're going to take a look at our G's. So you notice our G's have increased due to the Sport Soft tires. And we are going to go over to the ballast, and we're going to max out the ballast. I have no idea why this works the way it does, but it does. And right now it's only dropped our G's, but you can see it's dropped our high-speed G's and only our mid-speed G's by 0.01. Once we add power to this car, it helps a lot with the stability of the car, having control of the car. I used to build cars for like trying to replicate like real life cars, you know, so say you have like an S14 or an S15, you know, you have 500 horsepower, like it's a lot of power, but like it's not something that's super hard to drive in real life. And like a 2,500 pound car, 2,700 pound car, but for some reason in the game, like the characteristics, once you start adding power just even a little bit and then start putting these weight reductions on, like it changes the balance of the cars, and it's really weird and it doesn't really make any sense. So I'm going to try and hopefully show those characteristics maybe in a future video or something, but right now I just really want to focus on the PP system with this video and showing you guys how these things affect it. And then we're also going to put the weight all the way to the rear, and that's going to drop our PP just a little bit, but if you pay attention to our G's as well, it raises our mid-speed G's, it raises our low-speed G's, and it drops our high-speed G's, which is what we want in making a decent car. And I will say, I do not like comparing like all-wheel drive to rear-wheel drive cars and front wheel to rear wheel and so on. Like if you're going to compare cars like pace-wise, you want to compare all-wheel to all-wheel, rear wheel to rear wheel, and front wheel to front wheel, because all-wheel drives, no matter what, are always going to be the quickest in the game. Rear-wheel drives will be the second quickest, and front-wheel drives will always be the slowest from the experience that I have found using these cars in-game. And so with my 600 cars, usually I would go in here and I'd put a wide body on it, and that would help my G's. But with this being a 550 car and the G's that we have right now, I do not find it really necessary to do that. and I can also get more insight on what my G's will be with the stock body with once I get my wing and front lip and whatnot on this car. Um, First, we're going to put some wheels on it. We can go for some Advans. I like the RZ2s. I also like the regular RZs. I think we'll go for the regular RZs. And then we'll always, on every single car, always go for wide width and wide offset if you have an option. But obviously, for this car, we do not have an option. And then for right now, I'm going to be keeping stock diameter. Or we can look and watch what it does real quick, but if you watch the PP real quick, you'll notice it's at 507.6, and once we install these, it stays the same, of course. But usually I think it's the offset that changes that the most. But then we can also go into our wheels diameters and see how that also affects our PP. So we have 507.6 and now it's 507.43. So you'll see some guys in PP lobbies and you're like, why do they have big wheels on their cars? And most of the time they drop the PP so you can take out more weight of the car, you can add more power, whatever you want to do. But from what I've noticed whenever I'm building cars, the amount of PP that's affected by this usually changes, so I'm going to leave them at 17s for right now. And then we'll move on to aero, and we'll watch how the aero affects the car as well. Wow, they changed that. Usually it used to be more up close. But I'll go with this Type B, and you'll notice the change in PP putting this front lip on went from the 507.6 to with this. Either one of these parts should be the same PP. I'm not going to purchase the Type A because I'm low on money and I want to make sure I have enough for this build and maybe another one to show you guys. So we're going to go with the Type B, and you'll watch our PP change to 508.93. The side skirts here won't usually do anything. Rear, you have two options. Sometimes you just have a rear diffuser option. Sometimes you don't have anything. For PP racing, for 600 and below, for the most part, you're never going to use this diffuser. And the reason why is you don't get enough performance out of this part for the amount of PP it costs. And so it doesn't make any sense to have. If you have a car that has a really loose rear end and it's very difficult to control it, you probably will need a diffuser for that build. Or if you just run out of PP to use for a build, like if you're building a 600 PP car, but your car starts off at like 400 PP and you got max weight out of it, you got max power, you got the tires you want, you got a racing transmission, you got fully customizable suspension. I mean, you got everything on it, and you're at, let's say, like 570, 580 PP. You come back in here and you throw the diffuser on. The only cars I can think of right now that I have a rear diffuser on because of things like that is my S14, and I think that that's still even stock suspension, honestly. So you need to learn what these parts do to the car and how it affects the pace of the car to know like when to put on what part for a car. And so most of the time you're going to put on this Type A part, which also drops the PP. I have no idea why, but I'll select it and you'll see right now the PP is at 508.93. And we'll put this on. Now it's 503.47. And I have no idea why it does that, and it doesn't make any sense why it takes away so much PP because it literally does not affect the aero at all. And then we have multiple wings that we can choose from, and I'm going to try and show the difference between all of these if I can. Well, I know I can, but um, we'll start with this Type A real quick, and you'll notice that rear wings will always drop your PP, and that is because the higher amount of downforce you have in the rear end of a car, the more PP it's going to drop, probably because of drag, and that we're going to use that to our advantage, so that way we can make a more balanced car and a car that's going to be faster on the straights as well. But I want to show you the difference between these options and wings, because yes, like we have a custom wing set and that looks garbage, and these aren't too bad, but you know, you'll have cars and you have the custom wing and you're like, dude, that looks stupid. You know, you want to go with the duckbill, or you want to go with, you know, the normal Evo wing without having the Voltex stuff, Voltex generations or vortex generators on top here, you know. But these rear wings do have different max downforce for the rear. As far as the front, I haven't noticed any differences in capabilities as far as front aero between different front ends, front lips, front splitters, whatever you want to call them. The rear diffuser will increase the minimum front downforce you can put on a car to 50 usually, and it will also increase the amount of rear downforce you have, but it's not very necessary on cars that are 600 pp and lower that I find. I find them necessary on like my 700 pp cars, but not for something like this. So we'll go back into our car settings and I'll just show you. First thing, while I'm here, on all my cars I always drop the front aero to 0, and that will also decrease my PP, and it will also decrease my high-speed Gs, which I want because I'm never going to be taking corners at 155 miles or 150 miles per hour in this car, so it makes no sense to have high-speed Gs that are high. And then we'll have our, wow, okay, this car's got a lot of downforce. We've got 390 downforce on this car, which adds PP on this car for some reason, but usually lowest in the front and max in the rear will get you the least, like drop your PP the most for most cars, and I guess this car is not one of them. But now we'll check and see the custom wing and how much downforce it can produce for the rear. Usually most of the time it provides the most downforce, and for this car I'm not sure if that's going to be the case because that's significantly high from the experience I have. Most cars are 200, maybe 300 rear downforce max, but I guess this car is a special case, and so we're just going to go back to GT Auto so that way you can see the difference between the amount of downforce that they can produce, and so that'll affect the amount of downforce and how much PP you can drop. So I'm just going to go with the high wing because it has the widest stands. I feel like that's better suited for this car. Also going to put the roll cage in. This used to affect PP, but now they've updated it and it doesn't. I'm also going to put some lights in because that does help during night races. Front grille, I don't care. I'm not going to do any of those. And now I have my great long loading screen because I have a PS4 and it takes an hour to do this. And there we go. So we're going to go back to our car settings sheet and we're going to see how much downforce this custom rear wing can now produce. So it was like 380, 390 on the other wing, 390. And so now we can see the custom rear wing will produce 440, and we'll see how that affects our our PP, and it does drop our PP more than the previous wing does. And I'm assuming that the reason why that PP was increasing after adding the rear downforce was because of your high speed G's right here, which typically is uncharacteristic for a car to act that way whenever you add that amount of downforce, and so it really doesn't make any sense why it's doing that. You can see as I drop the downforce, there's the G's, so maybe it may be more beneficial for this car to just drop the downforce all the way. But for right now, I'm just going to keep it raised all the way because that's going to increase our PP for right now. And I'm going to start adding power and taking weight out of it to get to 550. And then we'll make that as the setting sheet right here. And then I'll make another setting sheet later on with this downforce all the way down. And we can see the difference between the downforce at how it affects the rotational G's as well as the PP. And so that's how I start off with most of my cars. We're going to put the anti-lag on strong always, and you can see sometimes that affects your, well, it always affects your PP, but sometimes it drops it, sometimes it raises it, just depends on what it is. Then I'm going to adjust my diff real quick. I always drop these to 5 for all-wheel drive cars. I really can't feel like what the front end does with the all-wheel drives as far as like the diffs. I've seen like sometimes I've tried out like all 5 on all these settings right here, and then I just adjust the rear diff. But one thing I do notice is like your braking sensitivity. I can really feel what that does whenever you're coming into a corner, and it affects how the rear end comes around. So if the rear end comes around really fast for your car, you'll want to increase this braking sensitivity. And if it's not coming around fast enough for you and you want it to be a more aggressive turn in, you'll decrease this number. And that works for any car that has a rear diff. But you'll have different amounts of sensitivity based on where the engine is placed and how the car reacts. Like you have a vehicle with the engine in the back, whether it be a Porsche or a mid-engine vehicle, this number is typically going to be higher. All-wheel drive cars, depending on how they feel, I battle a lot with oversteer than understeer with these cars, and so I've just kind of been playing around with the diff settings on the rear end to try and make it easier for me to drive the cars, but I still lack in that skill set for driving these cars and being able to tune the rear end. But we're going to get back into putting power into it, and if you've noticed, we've added all these parts to this car, and I believe our PP is basically where it started off as a stock car. Like, we've added aero to help benefit, we've added a manual transmission, we've added a customizable diff, and the car basically has the same amount of PP. So hopefully these things will help you learn how to take advantage of the PP system so you can build a faster car for these times and learn how to build these cars. And now we will start putting performance parts on it real quick. I always put bolt-on parts on first because you can always remove them. But you have things like racing crankshaft, bore up camshafts, your stroke up, engine balance tuning, like all these parts, ultimate parts, like you cannot remove those. And so it's very important to learn a process of building a car and making sure you're putting on these parts when you need them. Otherwise, either you have to get a new engine, which for this car isn't very expensive, but I believe this car is roughly the same price. So you're better off buying another car. And that also goes into you can have different builds for cars. So how I was talking about, like, I look at G's to see how they affect the car. You know, whether you want a speed build, something in between, or a handling car. You can buy, say, three or six of these Evos, and you can try all those different builds with that, because obviously you cannot remove um, the weight reductions, and so it's best, like, you can have a what we call like a stage 1 car, which would be stage 1 weight reduction. You have a stage 2 car, stage 2 weight reduction, and you have a stage 3 car, and so on, based on the amount of weight reductions that you have in that car. And so you can try these different things with those cars and figure out what works for you, like what you feel is the fastest, um, or what actually shows to be the fastest on the tracks, and which of those builds suit other tracks better than the other. And I'm not going to build 3 of these cars or whatever today because obviously I don't have very much money. But what we're going to do is put on all these bolt-ons first. And then we're going to go to computer. And then I always use the low RPM turbo no matter what, because if you look at the stats here, we have an increase in torque and also an increase in power. And so we purchase this, and now we have 386 horsepower, 390 foot-pounds of torque. If we go over to a high RPM turbo, it only costs 3 more pp, and you gain 50 some horsepower, but we also lose torque. And torque is important in this game because it helps your car accelerate and pull out of the corners better. For some reason, I mean, that's just the way the game works. You have small turbo, it spools a lot quicker. You pull out of the corners a lot quicker. I mean, if you want to try different things, I mean, you can go and try for this high RPM turbo or medium turbo. Like, okay, for this car, the medium turbo actually increases torque and power. Sometimes it drops the torque, and it only costs, what is that, like less than 1 pp for this turbo. But for right now, I'm just going to use the low RPM turbo. This is another situation where I can create another build sheet for this car, and I can try a build with this medium RPM turbo. But for right now, I'm not going to do that. And if you've noticed, I have not put any suspension on this car either. I have stock suspension, I have stock brakes, and that is because they do not give enough performance to make it worth it. So like these brakes, they cost 20 pp. Like, that's ridiculous for the amount of performance you get out of that part for the pp it costs. Racing suspension is 8 pp. Like, some cars, they don't cost as much. Some cars, you run out of parts to put on a car, and so you put on the customizable suspension. You have a race trans on it. You have all the weight out of it. You have all the power in it. And you still have pp left over. That's when you go to your race suspension. But I don't put them on most of my cars unless it requires it. I will put on a race transmission first. I will put a racing clutch and flywheel on first. I will put on a carbon drive shaft first before I even think about using this racing suspension. And for some reason, for this game, it works. I have a lot of experience and history building cars on Forza, and in that game, that was the first thing I would do to a car. You know, you always put the racing suspension on, you always put the racing brakes on, and that's what made the cars quick. You know, that's what you had to do for the cars to be quick for that PP system. I believe it's still called a PP system over there. I can't remember. It's been too long, you know, but that's what works for that game. And for some reason in this game, it does not work. You know, it's not worth the points that it cost. You know, like I could I could do stroke up. You know, that adds, what is it, 11 horsepower and almost 20 foot-pounds of torque. And that's 2 pp. You know, like what would you rather have? You know, you want to use brakes on a car that, you know, doesn't need them, or are you going to add a little bit more power to it? And that's something I want to go into, and I want to compare those different types of builds, because whenever I first came into this game and started playing it, all my cars, all my cars had these brakes on it, racing pads, fully customizable suspension, racing transmission, and they were light as possible as I can get them, you know. And then you have a car that's 600 pp with 250 horsepower, weighs 2,000 pounds, you know, but it doesn't go anywhere. Like it just does not have the pace. Like I did the calculations as far as power to weight ratio, and so with these cars, how I build them, they have a better power to weight. You know, there's it's yeah, you just got to try it. I mean, it works, and I'm gonna try and do another video on comparing that. But I just really wanted to focus on how this PP system works and looking at it. And so we have little less than 4 pp, you know, and so we have all of our bolt-ons that we want to use right now for this car. And so the next thing you want to look at are those, or I say that, I'm forgetting about weight reductions. You know, so you got weight reduction, so what would you do? You know, well, for 550 right now, this is gonna put us out of where we want to be. You know, and you're like 3,500 pound car. You know, how's that gonna move? How's that gonna work? And that's where we go back to our G's. And so for 550, you want around 17 low speed G's or so, and then maybe end up around 20 or so for your mid speed. And so on this car, we're a little bit lower than that. We're 13, 16, and then we got the ridiculous high speed G's for whatever reason. All-wheel drive cars, because they have a lot more grip than rear-wheel drive cars, you can get away with this for the most part, and you don't have to worry about having too bad of G's. And so what I'm going to do with this car is I'm going to leave it with stock weight, and we're actually trying to think, because I kind of want to do a little bit more weight reduction, because this is kind of a decent amount of power for 550. So what we can do is we can use our power restrictor and say we want 300, which is honestly too little. But you'll notice whenever we're using the power restrictor, we're increasing our torque but lowering our horsepower. And so that's why if you want to, like, say you have like a car that's stock and it's 620 pp and you want to bring it down to racing 600, and you have to bring down the power, you always use a power restrictor, because you gain that torque and it helps pull the car out of the corners. So it'll be a lot quicker than if you go to this output adjustment and it lowers them evenly relative. I think it does just about, kind of. So we have about 4 foot-pound drop in torque as we go through, and then we have 4 horsepower drop roughly going through that. But whenever we use a power restrictor, we only decrease power and we increase torque, which with this being an all-wheel drive car, it'll definitely help it accelerate a lot better because it has the grip and it can take the torque. But you just want to make sure that you're not losing all that power is not falling off at the top end as well. So we're going to do that, and we just dropped our PP a whole bunch. We're probably going to add more power back to it later, but for the sake of showing what the weight reduction does, we're going to go and put a stage 1 weight reduction on this car, and we're going to see how it affects the G's right now. And I'll have to admit, this is the first all-wheel drive car I've built for 550, so this is kind of unknown territory for me, but we'll see how it works. So we're going to go into our car settings, and so now we have a little bit better G's. We have 15, 17, which I'm a little bit more happy with, honestly, compared to the 13, 16 that we had. So we increased our low speed G's by 0.02 and our mid speed by 0.1, and same with the high speed G's, which I really wish I can get rid of those high speed G's, but I'm not quite sure why it's acting this way for this car. But now we're going to add our power back. Let's see where we're at. And this puts us over. So now we got 93 on the restrictor and we got 549 pp, but we want to get to 550. Another fun thing that you can do with these, since we just have bolt-on parts on this car, we can see which combination of these parts gives us the most power for the PP that we have. So right now we have 359, and so we can say let's try out the normal ECU. And so we had 359 before, so now let's see if we can go. So that's, what is that, 360, and we're a little bit over the PP still, so we know that combination doesn't work. And you can just go back and forth between swapping out parts to see, can I get 1 more horsepower? Can I get 2 more horsepower out of this part combination? I'm not going to go through switching out all these parts, but I would keep the low RPM turbo when doing this, but I would switch out things like your ECU and your air filter, muffler, exhaust manifold, and your intercooler, and try those different combinations to see if you can get the maximum amount of horsepower out of those. But that's only going to work if you're using a power restrictor. I'm just going to leave this like that for right now, and then I'm going to drop my ballast as well, so we get a little bit weight out of the car to try and get it to that 550. And now we've gone over, and it's weird, like sometimes you'll take ballast out and you'll find like a weird thing in the PP and it just drops randomly. Like it'll start going up, taking out more weight, and then it'll drop randomly and then go back up. And so finding those spots will definitely help you. You can drop them like that, and then you can maybe add more power to the car. And it's just learning what everything does, so that way you can get the most benefit out of it. And so now we have 0.07 more to get to the 550, and so I can come over here to my rear arrow, and whenever I decrease this, it should increase the PP. So now we're at 98, and now we're 0.4. And so the highest we're probably going to be able to get right now is 0.98, and that's okay. You know, I mean, it's fairly close, but if you want to try and get spot on, we can go back to our wheels and we can go to the wheel diameter, and usually playing around with that a little bit could be able to get you spot on 550. And we can see how that affects things now that we have parts in the car, and we can see how differently affected it may be compared to when we did it without all those powered parts in it. So let's say we go down to 16, so we're at 0.98. No, that's 0.97, but we want to go the other way. So let's say we go to 18s, 0.96. Well, I forgot earlier it was dropping it, so what if we go to 19s, 0.95, and go to 20s. I know it looks ridiculous. 0.98 again. So we remember earlier that the 20s dropped it significantly, but now we can see it's the same value as the 17s would be. So I'm going to put the 19s on it because that gives us 0.05 more PP to play with. So we can go back into our tuning setup and we can put that one more downforce back onto the rear wing and drop the PP and see if we can take more weight out of the car. And I think that would be priority for me, is getting the weight out of the car, than decreasing the rear wing. So let's go see. Go back to our settings sheet after it loads. So now we're back here. We're going to increase that right back. So now we're at 0.9, and we can see, can we take one more out of it? And we can't. So that kind of sucks. But can we take a little bit more out of the rear? We cannot. Another thing you can do if you want to play with the front, like, that's weird. Like, why did it do that? You know, like, usually whenever you increase front downforce, that will increase your PP, but for some reason in this case it dropped it, and so now we can go back. Can we get more weight out of it? Nope. And so the reason why it's dropping our PP is if you look down here at our high-speed Gs, it's dropping our high-speed Gs. And so that's a very, like, you see those high jumps in PP whenever you're messing with the build of the car, and it's usually related to those high-speed Gs, which are useless to us at this low PP of a car. So it actually aids us, and that's basically all this is doing. You know, messing with the aero, messing with the ballast, all of that is getting rid of that high-speed Gs, so that way we can have more PP to use and add handling in the low-speed Gs where we actually want it. So let's see what this does. So we can see even at 2, it increased our high-speed Gs back to 0.26. And we can just see how much, like, we can shove a lot more front aero on this than we could on most cars, weirdly enough. And so now we're at 0.99, like we're right there. But for me, I don't really want to add that front downforce. I'd be much happier taking a little bit off the rear, and I'm okay with that. And since I cannot get more weight out of this car, or actually one thing that we can try, since we got that little bit, is we can try and see if we can put more power in it because of that. And we can't, but it was worth a shot just to try and see what it can do. But I'll stick with this. You can put the 17s back on or whatever to get it that much a little bit higher, but I don't really notice a big difference. But that's going to be the build for this sheet, but we wanted to try and see what we can do with this rear downforce all the way down. You know, how it affects the lateral G's or rotational G's, and see how it affects the PP. And so I'll just go in here and I'll name this, or we're doing 550. Oops. So go here, do that, and then we'll duplicate this sheet. And so now we have a fresh sheet. We don't have to worry about changing what we just did. But if you do go back and try to adjust your wheel diameters, it will affect this previous build as well whenever you go to try and apply it in a race or whatever it may be. So, excuse me. So if you want to try different things, notice those. Oh wow, sorry about that. But if you try moving with those wheels, that's specific to the car, not the setting sheet. So it's going to affect everything, like all your setting sheets. And so I'm just going to keep my wheels where they're at for right now. And we're going to look at these setting sheets and see what we can do. Put all my weight back in it. And I'm going to drop these the downforce all the way and we can see what happens. And so there's our PP. We have a lot more to play with. We can add more power. And we have our better mid-speed Gs. We have our reduced high-speed Gs. But I also have no idea how this car is going to drive with these Gs. And so that's another thing whenever it comes into building these different sheets and these different handling effects for the cars and seeing how they react to them. Whereas, so like for this build with the low downforce on the rear end, we have the stats that we would want preferably, but with the other one, we probably would have. It's a potential that car would be better than this build, but that just comes with playing with everything and seeing what works. And I noticed did go over. So another thing you'll notice too, if you look down at the high speed Gs in the bottom left hand corner, whenever I adjust power, it also affects the high speed Gs, which is just something to pay attention to. I don't really understand it, but it just happens sometimes. So it just is what it is. And so we have our low downforce setup for this build, and since that's the primary focus of this build, I am just going to try and take some weight out of it. So took 1 kg out of it, and that's all we can really do. Another thing that we can do is I'm going to start another sheet. We're going to go off this and put this back so that we have more of the PP to play with. We can adjust this ballast positioning. Usually in most cars, rear-wheel drive, or the FR layout cars, MR layout cars, all-wheel drive cars, most of the time you're always going to put the ballast to the rear. For rear-wheel drive cars, this is because it gives you more traction, it allows you to get out of the corners better, and handle overall, because you'll have those cars that you build, you got 400 horsepower and a 2,500 pound car, like real life, like it'd be perfectly fine, but why in this game is it moving around all over the place? This ballast and ballast positioning, it's what is going to affect how that car handles in this game, and it's going to make it a much easier car to drive. But the ballast positioning also increases the PP most of the time, and it also affects your rotational Gs down here as well. And so we'll play with this so we can watch the PP and see how it's affected and see how the Gs are affected. And so I'll just go in 10 increments, and so we can go to 40, and we can see it dropped our PP, but it didn't affect our Gs right here. Go down to 30, Again, it was drops our PP just a little bit, but you can see our rotational G's there at the end. The low speed increases and the high speed decreases. And we go down to 20, and our PP decreases a little bit. And now from the 30, we have higher mid-speed G's, and our high-speed G's have remained the same as they were at 30. And so this is something you'll want to play with your G's too. Like for me, I would start by driving the 50 ballast position car and see how that feels. And then you can have this different sheet with, if you want to prioritize the low speed G's, which would be ideal, and we would have a setting sheet for that and see how that car drives. But I think for right now, for this build, I'm going to keep it at the 500, and that's just, or the 500 at the 50, and that's just what we're going to do. I really don't pay attention to the acceleration performance, as I don't think it translates to actual performance in the game, but it's kind of nice to see how everything affects it, because you want fast accelerating cars. So if your quarter mile decreases, I'd say that's pretty good most of the time, but I wouldn't use it as the main reference of your car's pace. I don't think it's the most important, but I think it's more important to the G's, looking at these figures to figure out the balance of the car and how it's going to drive. So I think so that's that. So we're going to go back to this one, and we're going to play with this. I want to just test drive these real quick, just to compare both of these builds real quick, because we got the high downforce and we got a low downforce, and so the G's are obviously affected quite differently, and I'd be interested real quick just to see how it affects each build. But I'll go into more of that stuff probably in a different video, but just real quick, we'll just take a look at this and see how it affects the car and how it drives. So let's go here. I'm just going to go to Scuba. It's a nice short circuit, and we can just see the way that the car feels. I drive in bumper view because that's what feels the best to me. For some reason, it just translates the feel of the... Why am I going there? It translates the feel of the car a lot better. I'm also not very good at driving while talking, so if I'm silent, it is what I'm trying to focus on, feeling the car, We'll get this loaded up. We'll just see what this does. Do a couple laps just to see. This is the first time I've played all day, so I'm not going to be driving very good, and I'm not really focused on trying to do a decent lap, but rather just see how the balance of this car feels. I think this one lap will be interesting. with that setup, and then we can also like look at the sector times, but I'm not going to remember those. You guys, if whenever watching the video, write it down, look at the comparisons or whatever. I'm not going to remember. But we got a 1014 with that setting sheet. So we'll just go back in and we'll go to this one that has the high downforce setup. And this is what you can do, just go into these time trials and just compare your builds and see, which one produces the fastest lap time. Because sometimes you may have a crappy feeling car, but it goes faster than the one that feels decent. But see what happens. I don't really feel difference through that corner, but I may also not really feel the difference. It may just show in lap time. So it's like, I don't drive all-wheel drive cars a whole lot because I really don't like the way that they feel. I just feel like I have to go slower through the corners to wait for it to rotate. But for some reason, they're just a ton quicker than real drive cars are. But it just doesn't make any sense, because it just doesn't feel that way. So, we got another 101.4, so on this track, maybe it really doesn't matter. Maybe it's for this track, those settings may not really matter as much, because obviously we're not going very fast through most of the corners. Like the highest speed corner is going to be that final corner, and we can come back here and we can look at these the times that we just ran. So we got a 429 and a 447, and I think the 429 is the one that we just ran. So they're fairly equal setups. It's just those lateral G's are a little bit different, and I think it'll matter a lot more on tracks that have a lot bigger straights. So the one that has those higher speed G's will probably be slower on the straight, rather than the one with the lower speed, lower G's on the high speed G's. Bit of a tongue twister, but hopefully that explains like a lot of what the PP system does, and helps you build cars in the future. I can kind of go through some of the cars that I've built previously to hopefully add on to like showing what I explain actually makes sense. And so we have this S15 that I built, and so this is another stock suspension car, and 600 pp, 509 horsepower, and it weighs 2,500 pounds. So it's relatively light, but I have the ballast in it, and I have it all the way in the back, and you can see like this is going to be a stupid fast car because I have really low speed G's on the high end right here, and then my low speed and my mid speed G's are very good for 600, and so this car should be just ridiculous. You can also see it's all the power in it for the low RPM turbo, and then all the weight. Got the body rigidity. That's another item that can drop your PP or raise it, and I usually wait till the end of my builds to go back and look at that, because depending on the combination of parts you have again on the car will affect if it drops the PP or if it raises it. Sometimes it may be a little, sometimes it may be a lot. It just really depends, but that's another part that you cannot remove from the car, so save it for last. I do have the manual transmission on here so we can see how the PP affects that. So weirdly enough, the stock transmission apparently is more advantageous based on the PP system, but we know that's not true because we can put a fully adjustable transmission where we can adjust all of our gears, and we can adjust this as well. That was 280. Oh, it did say, okay. But I mean, there's things that just really don't make sense in this game. And I mean, this car does not drive bad at all. I kind of want to go here. I will just try and show you real quick what if you want to do no ballast in a car, just removing that. So we decrease our low speed G's, our mid speed G's decrease by 0.01, and our high speed G's increase in a ridiculous amount by 0.09. And then we gain 21 pp as well by just removing that ballast, which, let's see, that's, how much weight is that? It's like 300 pounds roughly. And you can see how it shifts the weight balance as well in the car. So with all this weight, we are 49-51 front to rear weight, the front to rear weight balance, and with all of it out, we're now front heavy on the car. And ironically, our acceleration performance decreases. Our quarter mile time is now slower. All of the acceleration stuff is slower, and so that's what I was talking about earlier. Like, I don't use it as a reference for like actual like acceleration, like timed acceleration in the game, but it shows the performance of the car and how it affects the car. So you'd think like, hey, like adding ballast, that's going to slow my car down. Like, it helps the car. It allows you to put more power into it. It allows you to have better acceleration. It allows you to have better handling based on the G's here. And so we can just go into another Tsukuba race. Like, obviously this isn't going to be a 600 pp car, but it's just to show how the ballast affect the handling of the car and how difficult the car can be to control without having the ballast in it. So we'll just do that real quick. I didn't really plan on doing this, but here I am getting carried away, so I can try and help you guys and just explain how to make the cars go faster, how to make them feel better. And a lot of people will say, like, why, like, it doesn't make sense. Like, why would stock suspension feel better than race suspension? Like, the race suspension in this game is just really stiff. Like, it feels too stiff. It does not feel good. With the stock suspension, you're able to get out of corners a lot better. You're able to get into corners a lot better, and it just feels better. Like, you gotta try it. But let's see. So already I can, oh god. So already I can just feel how bad this car feels like this. Just pushing. I just feel slow going through these corners. And then it's also hard to get out of these corners. And you see here it's sliding. I'm not trying to do anything like crazy to upset the car. I'm just trying to drive it. And then we'll compare it with the car with the ballast. That's the only thing I'm going to change. And I can just feel like this last corner of the car is not turning, it's just pushing because it's so heavy in the front end of the car. So it doesn't, like, it's not always, like get the most weight out of the car, and it's going to make it feel the best. You know, like putting the ballast in is more advantageous than having all the weight out of the car, because you get to choose where to put the weight in the car to better balance the car and make it feel better. Like if you think about corner balancing a car, you know, this is essentially what you're doing by moving the ballast around. So we're gonna go back in car settings, and we're gonna, I can't remember which one it is. Let me see. Is it this one? What's this one? That one's less power. We're not gonna do that one. This one was it. And so now we're gonna have that 143 ballast back in the car, same position. That's all that's changing. Go back in here. And so technically that car should have been faster, right? So since it has more PP, but that's not gonna be the case. And already you can feel that this car turns a little bit better, but it still does kind of push. So you just have to adjust. And there I go deep. I'm not showing too well. So the car is a little bit more difficult to slow down, but it's definitely more controlled. I can feel whenever coming out of the corners, it's a lot more planted. Even though it gets a little bit loose, it doesn't feel like crazy. It still feels like you have the weight on those rear tires, so it still helps. And it's not, you can tell in that second gear, like just coming out of the corner, it's not ridiculous oversteer. And slow down a little bit more, get around. And so you can already see, like, I messed up that, like, that wasn't a good lap at all. And I was already roughly a second quicker than it was without the weight. Like, that wasn't good at all. And the driving was not, well, like, good. But we can go back here and see which one, what's today. Today's the 6th. So, here's the time that we just ran. And then the time with all the weight out of it is right here. So that's a 1 minute 0.5. And then we just ran a 59.3 with all the weight in it. So I felt personally that this time with all the weight out of it, as like, except for that whenever I initially started, like, I didn't do bad, like, driving the car. You know, it wasn't awful. I think I did worse driving it just now with all the weight in it, and you could already tell it's a second faster. Like, so that just goes to show, you know, how much how important the ballast is in the performance of the car. I feel like regardless if you use the race suspension, you know, however you set your aero up, you know, like, use the ballast. Like, that's going to be the biggest difference, I feel like, in the performance of the car, and it's going to allow you to put more power into a car, you know, as well as retain a good feel and balance in the car, and it's going to make you go faster. So if you guys want, I can make another video later on just kind of explaining, like, comparing these cars. Like, I already have some set up, but I don't want to make this a stupid long video, you know, but comparing if you want to put race suspension, race transmissions, full weight, you know, this car versus the way I build them with stock suspension and stock brakes. You know, you can take a screenshot of this or whatever, you know, look at the stats of these cars. You know, this one's 474 horsepower with, I think that says 2,500 pounds, and this one's 382, I think it says, at 2,100 pounds, you know, and you got these two as well. You can do the calculations on your phone and see which ones have the best balance or power to weight ratios to them, and you can see that the ones with the stock suspension, stock brakes will have the better power to weight ratio than the ones that are the lightest and have less horsepower. And also, whenever driving them, they handle better. Um, but I can do that for another video in comparing those. But hopefully, after this video, you have a good idea of how to manipulate the PP system and take advantage of it and make your cars drive better and go faster. You know, there's going to be some stuff to get used to. You're going to have deeper or longer braking zones with these cars, but it's not awful. And it's just going to be a better experience overall driving these cars than it would ones with um, race suspension with racing brakes. I mean, if like you look into it, you know, like this car in real life, you know, like you have stock 4-pot calipers on it from the factory. You know, you don't see everybody just going ridiculous, you know, and putting race brakes on it like if they want to go to a track day. You know, like you put racing pads on it or something so that way they don't um, you don't uh, fade them. You know, you don't go into corner one and your pads are hot and you slide through the corner. You know, but that doesn't happen in this game, so that's why it's not really worth it to put race pads on it. You know, you don't have to those realistic those things that happen in real life with stock pads aren't going to happen in this game with stock pads. You know, this game isn't 100% realistic, and it's just better off having stock pads, stock rotors on these cars, and taking advantage of how the game is designed um, to be able to go as fast as you can per lap on whatever track you want to go. You know, this is the fastest way I've found to get a car to go around a track. Um, there may be some other people out there, you know, maybe they can tune the race suspension good enough um, to be better at certain tracks than this car would be at. But I feel like overall, this is going to be your best bet is to set cars up like this for tracks. Um, but hopefully you guys have learned something, and hopefully this helps you guys go faster. I know there's a lot better drivers out there than me that probably race PP racing, and so hopefully we'll get you guys to actually show that and get faster, and that way we can have a lot more competitive racing. But thanks for watching, and hopefully this helped you guys out. So I appreciate it. We'll see you later.